Before you start this exciting and passionate story of love and choice, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. There are even more dramatic and beautiful stories from the Wild West waiting for you. The magnificent hall was flooded with the light of hundreds of candles, reflected in crystal and gold. The air was filled with the scent of French perfumes, the rustle of silk and the sound of a waltz. Lace glided across the parquet floor, fans shimmered in her hands. But in the midst of all this beauty, she stood like a shadow, alien to all this brilliance. She was called the Pearl of St. Louis not just because of her beauty, but because of the flawless shine that had been polished in the walls of the mansion for years. Her father, a railroad magnate, invested his fortune not only in wagons and rails, but also in raising his daughter. A French governess, strict dance teachers, music evenings, art lessons to conduct a conversation so that even silence sounds decent. From a young age, she was shown at balls like a fragile porcelain figurine. Her appearance was accompanied by whispers and glances, every gentleman dreamed of winning her. She accepted the courtship with a slight smile, but there was a strange calmness in her eyes, like a person watching someone else's dream. Her father dreamed of seeing her next to a senator or a banker, perhaps the owner of a newspaper empire. He was building a future lined with golden paths. But for her, all these men, with their impeccable phrases and pomaded mustaches, were like actors on stage, carefully dressed, but empty inside. Her every day was drawn out like notes on a musical score: morning tea, reading by the window, a carriage ride, sewing, a social dinner, ball rehearsals and dinner in the hall, where everything glittered, but nothing warmed. The family's reputation was as sacred as the law. One wrong step, one laugh too loud could cost invitations, glances, and a future. Small talk revolved around new dresses, the weather, and the latest intrigues among the wealthy. Everything seemed to her like a fake game where everyone had to play their part and not step out of character for a moment. The other women seemed pleased, nodding politely, laughing falsely, and trying on rings on their ring fingers. And she was watching, as if from the side. But there was something else in her gaze. There was fire hidden under layers of decency. Once, as a child, she escaped from a boring tea party, ran through the garden, through a dirty street, and found herself on a hill where the wind was strong and the city was small and far away. That day, for the first time, she realized what it meant to really breathe. Sometimes she would stand at the window for a long time, looking out to where the streets of the city disappeared into the endless horizon. Behind these houses, behind the smoke of factories, behind the manicured gardens lay a world she did not know, but she felt it, alive, free, rebellious. Her hands held volumes of novels about distant lands, about people who left comfort for wind and risk. The men discussed new lands, the land under the prairies, railroads, Indians, gold, and something ancient, like the call of blood, died in her heart. The nights became restless. She tossed and turned, listening to the silence, as if there was more to it than the rustle of brocade. Music, charity events, art lessons, she tried everything, gave up everything. Everything was too neat, too expected. She was beginning to realize that her soul wasn't looking for a position, didn't crave titles, didn't want to be someone's wife for the sake of a family name and rank. Everything they wanted from her was written by someone else's hands. But what she wanted didn't have a shape yet, but it was already throbbing in her chest more and more every day. One day at lunch, my father mentioned that he was going west to check on the land in the railroad section. Casually, he offered his daughter to go with him, change the situation, and get some fresh air. He didn't expect her to agree, much less without hesitation. But she felt that her heart had known about this trip long before the words. It wasn't just a whim, it was a premonition, almost a call. That evening, she walked through the halls of her home, gazing at every gilded detail, every smooth column, as if saying goodbye. A few days later, the train started moving. Fields raced outside the window, coal smoke scattered into the sky, and the step began to slowly but surely fill her entire being. The train slowed down, as if reluctantly yielding to the hot breath of a foreign land. Dry air, thick with dust and the smell of burning wood, rushed into the cars through the open windows. Horses snorted at the platform, wheeled carts creaked under the weight of loads, and men with rolled-up sleeves smoked, leaning on rifles. She came out, slim and sophisticated, in a smoky rose-colored traveling dress, with gloves that instantly turned gray from the dust. Her shoes sank into the loose earth, and her gaze swept over every face, every unsightly corner, as if she was learning the world anew. My father walked confidently. He was greeted by two men, tanned, stern-eyed, wearing vests and hats, and smelling of sweat and tobacco. They exchanged short handshakes and barely paid attention to the lady next to them. No one bowed or brought chairs here. People lived here in a different way. and she was watching, with the kind of attention that comes when you first come out of a dream. The city, if you could call it that, was more like a rough, hastily put together stop in the middle of eternity. The wooden facades of the saloons, the faded signs, the gutters along the street filled with gray water and ash, everything here breathed heat and something animal, beautiful. The dust hung in the air, as if it had become part of the sky forever. There are men with guns and silent eyes on every corner. Harsh laughter, the sound of broken glass, and the chords of an out-of-tune piano could be heard from the saloon. The smell of tobacco, spilled alcohol, and horse sweat mixed with the hot wind. Everything was rough and noisy, but alive, unbearably alive. She noticed the women. Tanned, in sturdy skirts and boots, with hands that knew the work, and backs that held the load without complaint. There was something in their gaze that she had never seen in any secular living room, strength that stood up to the sun. Horses clicked their hooves on the boards, herds were rushing somewhere in the distance, and the prickly silhouettes of cacti loomed against the horizon. The sun was hitting the top of my head like a hammer. And in this world, she seemed like an alien bird, rare, thin, almost transparent. But instead of fear, a strange, quiet glee flared up in his chest. The streets lived their harsh lives, with pungent smells of alcohol and tobacco in the air, drunken arguments and muffled threats. Whispers of recent attacks and outlaw gangs slithered through the alleys like shadows in the twilight. Everyone here knew that trust meant risking their lives. My father talked about the difficulties of managing the lands, about how unstable the situation is here. The forces that hold power are weak and unpredictable. Control requires blood and steel, not contracts and ceremonial words. The heroine listened, and tension grew in her chest. In this new world, people survive by different laws, laws in which sophistication and conventions have no place. Her heart was pounding harder, from fear, but even more from the feeling that everything around her was real, alive, real for the first time in her life. Evening slowly descended on the city, turning the dust into a soft golden glow. The sun, like a tired wanderer, disappeared behind a distant hill, and the air became cooler, filled with the smell of scorched earth and smoke. She stood on the veranda of the hotel, leaning on the railing, and peered out into the street, where nightlife was slowly beginning to wake up. In the distance, a horseman's silhouette appeared out of the dust and twilight. Lonely, mysterious, like a shadow that came from another world. His horse was black and shiny, as if it had absorbed the darkness. His clothes are dark, with deep folds hiding his features, illuminated only by penumbra. He was in no hurry, his step was steady and confident. He lifted his head for a moment and met her gaze. There was something elusive about this silent exchange, as if time had stood still. Then he turned away and drove slowly away, disappearing into the sunset dust. She stood there, feeling something shift inside her. She didn't know who he was, but his appearance overturned the tranquility of her world. The night had fallen like a heavy veil, and the city seemed to have fallen asleep with her tired eyes. But she lay there, listening to the silence, in which the rustles and creaks of the old house sounded, and remembered every detail, the smells, sounds, faces that this world breathed. Everything was rougher, sharper, more real than the old life in the gilded halls. Her heart was beating faster, and she could feel a spark igniting inside her that she hadn't noticed before. For the first time, she wasn't just an ornament, a doll for a secular society. She felt alive, with desires, fears, and power. The writer's gaze floated before his eyes like a call from the depths. His silence turned out to be louder than any words, and his image was the key to what had been dormant in my soul for a long time. Something woke up. And now the way back seemed unbearably narrow and alien. She knew that something else was waiting for her, a wild world that beckoned and called. Every day, her gaze searched more and more for that gloomy silhouette appearing on the outskirts of the city, where the streets turned into a wasteland, and the shadows became longer and thicker. He seemed to be a part of this world, but at the same time an outsider, stubbornly refusing to fit into the usual order. Stories were whispered around, that he was a soldier who fought on the fronts, but after some tragedy he became an exile. He was accused of a crime he did not commit, and the city accepted him like a shadow, leaving him aside. He kept to himself, avoiding human eyes, as if preferring solitude even where it was dangerous to be alone. But despite his aloofness, his actions, quiet and fair, have saved those in need more than once. Like a grim knight, he followed his own laws, where honor meant more than the word of the law. She watched and felt that there was more to this man than just a fugitive. His silence spoke louder than words, and the mystery beckoned to him stronger than any light. In the shadow of dusty streets and under the scorching sun, he appeared where help was needed, quietly and unnoticeably, like a ghost who had never sought fame. Once he fought off an old man from bandits, whose booming voice and a wave of a gun threatened the peace. Another time, with skillful hands, he repaired the broken wheel of a cart that could no longer go on without his intervention. Even the animals of the desert felt his care. The young horse trapped in the trap was released and set free, as if he knew that the savior would not harm him. The inhabitants, accustomed to the brutality of the frontier, respectfully respected him. Although many were afraid, his silent presence was an integral part of the balance in this harsh land. He was an enigma and at the same time a pillar, a man outside the system, but always on the side of justice. Her heart ached when she thought of him, a man who chose the path of loneliness, but could not remain indifferent to the pain of others. Each new appearance of the rider became a magnet for her, invisible, but irresistible. She secretly watched him from afar, noticing how he moved around the city with confidence and a slight degree of fatigue in his movements, as if carrying a load of unspoken words and worries. He walked quickly, looked attentively, and rarely lingered in public, like a shadow that appeared only to disappear again. She was trying to understand his world, his loneliness, his struggle hidden behind calmness and restraint. Fear and attraction warred inside her, fear of the unknown, of the dangers he could bring, and the attraction to freedom and the power that emanated from him. In this man, she felt the key to her new life, to the freedom she had dreamed of for so long. With each passing day, her heart refused to obey the old rules more and more, responding more and more loudly to the call of the wild land and the mysterious stranger. The silence of the city became shaky. With every passing day, rumors of bandits visiting the neighborhood turned into reality. The dusty trails were filled not only with heat, but also with anxiety, and the locals felt that peace was on the verge of destruction. He, an outlaw man, turned out to be the only one who could withstand this threat. His shadow, dark and unshakable, appeared at the right moment, when the walls of the city seemed to be the weakest link. Despite her fear, she decided to get closer, not only for her own sake, but also for the sake of those who had become dear to her. Tension arose between them, a mixture of danger and attraction, the promise of change and the struggle with inner demons. It was the first sign that their destinies were intertwined, in this harsh world where love was born on the verge of risk and unpredictability. Night fell softly, enveloping the city in a blanket of stars and coolness. She stood in the shadows, watching as he slowly lit a fire at the edge of the desert. The flames crackled and played on his face, revealing rare moments of vulnerability. There were no words between them, but the silence spoke louder. Her heart was beating in time with the fire, and in every glance she read the promise of change, willingness to fight and hope. That night, something awoke in her forever, the realization that her life would never be the same again. Everything that had seemed far away and impossible now felt close, like the wind blowing through cacti. She stood on the threshold of a new destiny filled with danger and passion, and was ready to accept it. The city's bazaar was a place not only for trade, but also for the meeting of destinies. Amidst the cries of the merchants and the smells of spices, dust and sweat, she suddenly bumped into him, or rather, their eyes met when she grabbed a jug by the well. Without words, without the usual explanations, they exchanged a quiet understanding. He stood nearby, gloomily watching the people around him, but when he met her eyes, something softened. She no longer saw him as just a mysterious horseman. There was a depth of pain and loneliness in his gaze that seemed familiar to her. On the street near the saloon, in the hustle and bustle, their paths crossed more and more often, casual gestures, the exchange of barely noticeable smiles. The world around them was harsh and cruel, but a quiet, elusive bond grew between them. For the first time, she felt that she could trust someone not with words, but with her presence. That day, when the shadows lasted longer than usual, she found herself trapped. A group of bandits, driven by greed and cruelty, spotted her on the edge of the city. Her heart was pounding as she tried to escape, but there was almost no turning back. And then he appeared, like a ghost from the frontier itself, grim and fearless. Without further ado, he stood between her and the danger, holding the bandits at bay with gestures and cold eyes. His dark silhouette, sturdy and confident, seemed invincible. After the threat was over, he silently helped her up, his eyes reflecting not only determination, but also quiet concern. She couldn't leave him in the lurch. She carefully treated his wound, gave him something more than just medical care. There was a sense of security in her touch, felt for the first time in a long time. An invisible bond was born between them, one that does not need words, strong and living in trust. This moment was a turning point. They realized that in this merciless world they could lean on each other, find protection and strength where it seemed that danger surrounded them from all sides. Her heart, which had been closed off from fear and doubt for a long time, began to beat differently, in unison with his. Since he had saved her on that difficult day, the world around her seemed different, filled with new colors and sensations that had previously seemed unattainable to her. For the first time, her heart fluttered not from other people's expectations or secular rules, but from sincere feelings that could not be hidden. Joy filled every cell, like spring rain after a long drought. She was afraid, but this fear was different. It did not paralyze, but made her feel alive, real. Excitement filled her soul, mixing with the passion born in the shadow of the wild lands. It was more than just an emotion, it was an awakening, a liberation from the shackles of gilded halls and endless conventions. Now she knew that life is not a spectacle for the public, but a stormy journey full of dangers and pleasures. The fire of freedom was lit in her heart, and every breath she took was filled with the determination to go forward wherever the road led, even if that road was covered with dust and the shadow of prohibitions. The news that she was getting close to a man many considered an outlaw spread through the city like a dry wind through the desert. There were whispers, condemnations, and glances of alarm and condemnation behind her back. For the family, this was not just unacceptable, it was a disgrace, a threat to everything they had built over the years. The house that had seemed like a fortress to her had become a trap of words and cold stares. My family talked about the lost reputation, about how quickly you can destroy everything with one mistake. Those around her were waiting for her to fall, unaware that a flame was burning inside her that could not be extinguished. The pressure was getting stronger every day. She felt the fear of losing the familiar oppressing her heart, but doubts were mixed with determination. After all, the truth she felt was unbearably stronger than other people's fears. The choice between the past and the future was becoming increasingly difficult, and she stood at a crossroads where a step in either direction meant a new life or the destruction of everything. In the silence of her room, wrapped in silks and shadows of the past, she felt a struggle flare up inside. The return to safe halls and the glitter of gold beckoned with familiar peace, promising protection from storms and judgments. But what did this security without a soul mean? Without the real life she'd first touched with him? His thoughts wove threads of doubt and hope, as if torn between duty and desire. Real life, she realized, does not begin in comfort and predictability, but where there is love, freedom and the opportunity to be yourself. My heart guided me, and the fear of the unknown gradually gave way to determination. At that moment, when the wild wind outside the window was whispering the call for change, she made a choice, the one that would change her fate forever. The boundary between the past and the future was dissolving, and a new world was opening up ahead, filled with dangers, but alive, authentic and promising freedom. She stood by the window, where the sunlight played on the gilt and crystal, but in her heart there was no longer any place for splendor and luxury. The decision was not easy, but clarity came like a quiet, inexorable wind that does not ask, but simply changes everything around. Giving up money, inheritance, and family means freeing herself from the chains that have kept her in a golden cage for a long time. His last glance took in the familiar halls, the paintings that held the faces of strangers, the mirrors that reflected only masks. In this light of the past, there was no present for her, only peace mixed with longing. Her new life began where there was no golden lies, where there was truth and freedom, even if it was a road with sand and thorns. Behind her was a world of conventions, ahead lay the road she had chosen herself. They left the hustle and bustle of the city, heading into the depths of the desert, where the land seemed barren but promised freedom. The abandoned house stood on the edge of a sun-scorched plateau, surrounded by prickly cacti and sparse shrubs. The wind whistled through the cracks in the old boards, and the night sky scattered millions of stars, as if promising a new life filled with simplicity and honesty. There was no gold, no pretense, just the harsh beauty of the wilderness. The days passed in arranging the house, where every nail found in every shelf became a symbol of their common future. He was quietly repairing the walls, she was cooking on the campfire, their movements merged in a quiet harmony that they were still learning to understand. Trust was building between them, silent but as strong as the rocks around them. In this place, among the sands and stars, she felt for the first time that she belonged to someone and something real, inseparable and real. The restless nights in the desert were marred by disturbing signs, footprints in the sand, the echoes of horse footsteps far in the valley. Enemies from the rider's past, or representatives of the law who did not want to let the fugitive go, were slowly approaching. Their presence became palpable, like the shadow that grows on the walls of an abandoned house as the sun sets. He tried to keep a low profile and avoid open confrontations, but time and circumstances would not let him rest. A recent fight had left a wound on his body that slowed down his movements and made them vulnerable. Their shelter, which had seemed secure, suddenly turned into a trap, making their hearts beat faster with fear and tension. Every rustle, every noise outside the walls seemed to be a harbinger of the coming storm, a test from which there was no retreat. At the most inopportune moment, fate played a cruel joke on him. His wound, previously hidden behind his armor and the shadow of the night, had become too deep to continue hiding. While trying to escape from his pursuers, he stumbled and collapsed on the rocky ground, pain gripping his body, depriving him of strength and the will to escape. Heavy breathing and throbbing pain are a sign that now he will not be able to protect either himself or her. She was left alone, surrounded by silent desert hills and alien eyes that were already about to close around their shelter. My heart was squeezed with fear, but at the same time, determination burned inside, brighter than any flame of a campfire. Now everything depended on her courage, on her strength to fight for the one who had become her everything. Without the right to make mistakes, without time for doubt, she felt that this moment would be a turning point, that her actions would determine not only the fate of the man, but also their common life, their dreams and hopes. The night enveloped the desert in a dark blanket, but inside the heroine burned a fire of determination, brighter than all the stars in the sky. She knew that the man who had become her support and meaning was lonely and wounded, and this was not the time to wait for outside help. The way to escape lay through deserted trails, amid dangers that could easily undo everything with a single shot or a wrong step. With the last of her strength, she left the shelter, leaving safety in the familiar world behind. There was fear in every step, not only for himself, but also for him, for their common fate. The wind rustled through the dry bushes, as if whispering warnings, but her heart was beating in unison with an inner voice that kept saying, "Go ahead, just go ahead." The lights of a town loomed far ahead, where enemies might be hiding. But now fear was not paralyzing, but hardening, turning into strength and determination. This step meant the beginning of a new life, not from golden halls and glitter, but from a real struggle and love that makes a person free. She went forward to save him and herself together, to prove that courage is not the absence of fear, but the ability to go through it. She walked along a narrow path where darkness mixed with the first chill of dawn. There was a mixture of anxiety and hope in my heart, as if fate itself hung in the balance. Every step brought her closer to the unknown, to the moment that would change everything. But now the fear receded before willpower, before the fire that ignited love and determination. Everything is still ahead, and she is ready to face it, no matter which way her path leads. Through the evening gloom, the hard news reached the heroes. The law or the gang that had been chasing them for a long time was approaching. The wind carried the scent of danger, and the silence, like a taut string, foreshadowed a storm. At that moment, the heroine felt a fire ignite in her, not to retreat, not to hide, but to face the challenge. Everything that had been before, safety, habits, fear, dissolved into her new consciousness. This was her path, her life, which she chose on her own. With every breath, the inner mood grew stronger, ready to fight, to a fate that could not be changed, but could be accepted and fought for. The night enveloped the desert with its black cloak when the silence was suddenly broken by sharp gunshots. The wind carried the sound of bullets, whistling and clanging. A collision with danger became inevitable. Determination burned in their eyes, and their hearts beat in unison, knowing that delay was death. Every movement was precise, as if time was slowing down and space was shrinking to its limit. There was a moment of silence between the shots and the screams. Glances met, and in these silent exchanges of feelings there was a power that did not need words. He covered her from bullets, she helped him hide in the shadows of rocks and cacti. The risk was in the air, but together they were more than just the two of them. They were one force, ready to fight and survive. Every shot, every movement was an act of heroism, highlighted by the ruthless brutality of the night. The flashes of fire in the night gradually subsided, leaving behind only the flickering of embers and the heavy breathing of those who survived. At that moment, they felt that the edges of what was possible had been reached. Victory or defeat hung in the balance. If it hadn't been for their mutual support, determination, and willingness to go all the way, things might have ended differently. Victory came, but with bitterness. There were traces of battle all around, and in their hearts, the imprint of the horror and losses they had experienced. However, it was in this battle, amidst the blood and dust, that their souls changed. They were no longer just fugitives or exiles, they had become partners in fate, a single whole, stronger than before. The past ceased to have power over them, and the future began to sparkle with new colors, full of hope and unyielding strength. Their relationship turned into something more than just survival. It was a love that burned brighter than any wounds and scars. She was standing on the edge of a cliff, under a starry sky that seemed endless and eternal, like a reflection of a new life that had opened up in front of her. Her gaze was steady and calm, completely different from before, when she was just a brilliant lady of the city, an ornament of secular salons, a prisoner of golden chains and other people's rules. Now a new power burned in her, inner freedom, born in struggle and trials. Her heart, which had previously been beating in the rhythm of conventions, was now beating in unison with the wind and the roar of the wild. She knew that the path she had chosen was not an easy one, but it was the real one, her own. Without looking at the past, at her fears and reproaches, she strode forward, resolutely accepting her fate. Every breath filled her with confidence, every step strengthened her self-confidence. She became not just a woman from the city, she became a symbol of strength and freedom, wild and beautiful, like the land itself, which she chose as her home. Her blood was boiling in her veins, hot and rebellious, like the very land of prairies and mountains where she chose to live. It was the blood of real life, with its pain, joy, and the power of a love that knows no compromise. She rejected the tranquility of fake security, choosing a path where every feeling is sharp and alive. The wind whispered to her about the future that belonged to the two of them, wild hearts, free and unconquered. Thank you for being with me and listening to this unusual story. If you like this story, please like it. Thanks to your support, we will be able to create even more fascinating stories. Leave your impressions in the comments and tell us exactly what touched your heart. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel so that you don't miss the exciting new adventures and heartfelt stories that await you ahead. See you soon.